403761. This is a memo that was attached to an email, Mr. Sabia, that you sent to Deputy Prime Minister Freeland on February 8th at 1700 hours -5. I think that's right, -5. And do you recognize this memo, sir?
Yes, I think so.
So these are in this memo, you lay out 3 options to the minister, or the Deputy Prime Minister. The first is the use of the Bank Act. The second option is redacted on the basis of cabinet confidence. I've asked my friend at the DOJ if she would reconsider that, and I appreciate that will take some time. And then the third option is moral suasion, and this is not something that you discussed with Commission Counsel this morning. And I just want you to take a look at that second paragraph where I think it was the minister's expectations to ask bank CEOs to remain vigilant in their review of business relationships to ensure that they're not being used to support illegal activities. And is that one of the considerations that was given to Minister Freeland into how she should deal with this situation?
No, what this is just a summary of possible approaches that could be used. These are not and shouldn't be construed as recommendations to the minister in any way. And the description that you see in the second paragraph is really about, well, if one were to go down the path of moral suasion, here's the kind of thing that it would involve.
Okay, and when you talk about support illegal activities, you would have to define what that means in these circumstances, correct?
Yes.
And I think you stated earlier today that the emergencies, the declaration of emergencies and the orders underneath it defined what those illegal activities would be.
The Emergencies Act did, that's my understanding.
Yes, it did, thank you. And now, if I can move on to the scope of the measures, and many of these questions will be to you, Mr. Sabia, and to you, Ms. Jacques. You agree that the emergency measures order prohibited any entity as defined in Section 3, which covered both provincial and federal institutions, from dealing with any property held by a designated person, right? That was you'd agree with that characterization of the order?
Can you pull up Section 3?
Do you have it do you have Section 3 before you? If not, I'll pull it up, yes. Oh, no, wait, I left it at my chair. Sajid, can you help me with the SSM number?
If you could please pull up ssm.CAN.401911_REL.0001.
So this is the emergencies measures order, which is the financial order. And Section 3 is the one that covers the institutions that okay, well, I have the wrong document. Okay, there is a list of institutions that are covered by the order, correct? These include financial institutions, credit
Yes.
unions, insurance companies. Those cover both provincial and federal institutions, correct?
That is accurate.
Right. And it prohibits those financial institutions from dealing with the property of any designated person.
That's correct.
Right. And that essentially freezes their assets, the designated person's assets.
Yes, they can suspend dealings with those individuals, and it could lead to the freezing of
Freezes an account, not necessarily.
account.
Well, freezes their ability to deal with their property held at those institutions. Yes, I see you're
Bank
nodding.
accounts.
Sorry, we need an audible.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And it applied, you saw that it applied to joint accounts, to registered savings accounts, and to investment accounts.
That is true.
And you're aware that the Canadian Bankers Association voiced concerns to both you and the RCMP about the scope of these orders.
I don't recall the CBA voicing concerns with the scope of the orders. I do not recall that.
Do you remember any representatives from banking institution raising concerns about the scope of the orders?
The scope, no, but the impact, I mean, one concern that was raised with respect to the impact it may have with respect to child support. It's the only concern that I recall.
Okay, do you remember that they asked whether it applied to joint accounts?
That's very possible, and if they did, I would have said yes.
Right, and your office prepared, or someone at the department prepared a kind of ongoing and consolidated question and answers, kind of an FAQ for banks, correct?
Well, not for banks. I mean, we had.
Sorry, I say bank, I mean for financial institutions.
I mean, we had prepared some a frequent question for internal purposes, yes.
This is, if I can just pull up ssm.can.702. And I think this is the consolidated FAQ. And there were questions about, correct, thank you. And page number 6. Scroll down to RCMP, please. There we go. When we say accounts, what exactly is being referred to? So those are the types of accounts that this would apply to, correct?
Yes.
And if we go to page 7, there were questions about whether small donations were being investigated.
Yes.
And your response, or the RCMP response, was that they weren't, correct?
They were not being investigated.
You'd agree that on the face of the order, small donations were captured on the face of the order. And Mr. Sabia, I think you even provided that advice to Minister Freeland at some point.
I don't recall. I honestly don't recall that, but I mean, I think that's true.
Yes, they were
I think
captured.
that's true, that they were captured, but nothing.
Okay, I will just put it for reference for the record that.
And on those small donations, just to specify, yes, they were captured, but it's important to note that certainly the order was not retroactive. So any donations that would have been given prior to the Emergencies Act being enacted were not captured. And as we said previously, it's important that you look at the context as to when we came about to draft the order, we didn't know how the situation would evolve, but in the application of the order, certainly the focus was not on those donations.
Correct. So, and Ms. Jacques, I think it was you who provided answers to those questions at ssm.can 6054, where Minister Freeland had questions with respect to the order, and Mr. Sabia, you asked for responses on those questions, and Ms. Jacques, you provided the answers in red where you stipulated, this is on.
Can we see?
I know, I'm just gonna talk while they pull it up, otherwise I run out of time. So
It'd be good to read it.
you will, I would for sure give you a chance to see it. The question was, and what about people who were never at the protest but made donations? And your response was, as stipulated in the order, it is possible that a person who indirectly funded the illegal protest for the benefit of a person involved in the protest had their account frozen. This would only occur if they made a donation after September 15th, which is, as you were saying,
February 15th.
February 15th, it was not retroactive. So if you go to page 2, there's the question, the second paragraph. Do you see that?
And what about people?
Yes, so that was the question for Minister Freeland, and then your answer is in the less dark font.
Yes.
Okay, and And I think some of the financial institutions asked if they were able to exercise some humanitarian exceptions as well to the orders, and maybe this is what you were referring to as child support, correct?
And certainly we told them and as they have, use their good judgment in applying this order throughout, yes.
And they also asked if they could continue to process automated payments from the accounts, correct?
That I do not recall if they asked me that question.
Okay. And the order also applied to auto insurance, correct?
Yes.
Yes, but the RCMP decided not to communicate with insurance companies as they wanted to ensure that it would be safe for vehicles to leave the demonstration.
Yeah, now this is an important point because it goes to what we were trying to accomplish here. So that created the possibility that could occur. In reality, in actuality, it never occurred, but it did have a helpful incentive effect, to use that word again, with respect to wanting to find a peaceful solution to these disruptions. So the RCMP's approach to this was, I think, completely appropriate. The risk to the truck owner was there. But action was not taken because if the action had actually been taken, it could have, in certain circumstances, impeded the movement of the truck, which nobody wanted. But it did create an issue of uncertainty that a truck driver would have to assess and therefore hopefully encourage the truck driver to leave peacefully, which was the objective all along.
So, Mr. Sabia, I just want to, with respect to that answer, I think to me, the order did more. The order would have allowed the RCMP to ask for that person's insurance to be canceled. And what the RCMP did is that it did not exercise their discretion under the order to do that. But the order on its face, and the insurance company could have proactively canceled that truck driver's insurance, and then it would not have been safe for that truck driver.
But it's instructive that never happened.
Right. So it's good that it did not happen, that part of the order was not exercised.
It's positive that it had the effect that it had, which was creating the possibility that might happen, but that it never actually happened. That's an almost ideal combination.
So in kind of economic terms, it created a microeconomic incentive.
It did.
And I want to go back to the issue of what happened between the financial institutions and the RCMP. It was not just that the RCMP provided information to financial institutions, but under the order, the financial institutions were obligated to provide reporting to either the RCMP or CSIS with respect to the freezing of accounts, correct?
Yes.
So it was the financial institutions' onus to ensure that they were in compliance with the order.
When they had information, yes. I mean, it was
Not
their
just when they had information.
No, but you mean it's their responsibility to be compliant with the law, yes. And also there is a clause that's plead that they need to share information that they have with the RCMP and or CSIS.
Correct. And so, Ms. Jacques, when you mentioned earlier an indemnity that was provided, that indemnity was only provided to financial institutions if they complied with the order. It did not provide an indemnity to financial institutions not to comply with the order or not to report to the RCMP, correct?
That is accurate.
Right. So the financial institutions, if, as you say, they decided to exercise their discretion for humanitarian or other purposes, they were taking the legal risk for doing so.
It was their decision to make and do the assessment and consult internally, and receive the proper advice on their decision.
Because they would receive a list of names or vehicles from the RCMP, and then they would have to report back to the RCMP of all the lists of accounts that they froze. And so the RCMP could compare both lists later and decide whether the financial institution complied with its legal obligations.
I don't know if there was any such exercise by the RCMP to review compliance with the order. I've never heard that in the past.
But the order provided for that information sharing.
It was to provide for the information sharing to help the RCMP and pursuing some maybe investigation. Yes.
And then I understand
not to go back, not for the RCMP to take account. That was not the purpose. It was to share information to allow the RCMP to do their job.
But it could have been used to decide whether there had been compliance. It could be read that way.
It was not intended that way. I find that to be a stretch.
Okay. And I understand that your department received aggregate information of how much was frozen by financial institutions. You did not receive the specific accounts, but you received the aggregate numbers, correct?
From the CBA, yes.
From the CBA. And I want to, if I could take you to ssm.can 50209. This is a long email chain between Deputy Prime Minister Freeland's office and and your department regarding the enforcement of the Emergencies Act. And if we could go to the last page of this document, page 8, this is on February 16th, which is one day after the order is made public. Alex Lawrence, who's the Director of Communication for Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, asks for tangible figures that could be made public the next morning about how much, about the enforcement measures. And if you go up, I mean, I'm not sure if you personally were in communications, but your office was in communication with the Deputy Prime Minister and to ensure that she had updated numbers of how the number of accounts that were frozen and the quantum that was frozen, both were being provided to the Deputy Prime Minister, correct?
Well, certainly we provided the information, usually via Michael.
Through Mr. Sabia?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were, no mystery here, we were wanting to track this information, again, as you've said, not with respect to individual names, et cetera, but aggregate data. We were wanting to track that, one, to see whether or not this activity was actually underway, that what we had set out to do was actually underway. And second, again, and this is, very important, we were tracking it because the whole intent here was to have this in place for as short a period as possible so that it could be, that this kind of activity could be removed as quickly as possible because hopefully it was no longer needed. Because if it had the intended effect of bringing a peaceful end or contributing to bringing a peaceful end to these disruptions, then mission accomplished, and this whole thing should go away. So in the interest of being able to do that as promptly as possible, yes, we were tracking this fairly carefully. And as you know, I think as of February, the 21st, 22nd, pretty much all of these accounts had been unfrozen. So it was actually quite. It came and went quickly, which is what our intent was at the time, because it contributed to the peaceful end in a way that we had intended.
And Mr. Sabia, let me just pick up on that last point that you stated, that by the 22nd, you're aware that the RCMP had communicated to financial institutions that they should begin unfreezing certain accounts, correct?
Well, yes, because as the disruptions were coming to an end, the RCMP was doing a good job of communicating that to the financial institutions, and they were quickly unfreezing accounts.
And I'd suggest that there's also maybe a third purpose to Mr. Lawrence's email, which is that I think the Deputy Prime Minister wanted to be in a position the next morning at the press conference to inform the public that measures are being taken.
Yeah, look, I can't speculate as to what Alex's purpose was or behind that email. The minister wanted to be kept in the loop on the level of activity and whether we were seeing progress here, and we certainly kept her informed of that.
Thank you. And this is going to be my last question, which is with respect to FinTrack. I understand from the FinTrack report that they did not see an elevated level of suspicious transactions or a noticeable change in transaction levels during the period of the Freedom Convoy. And you agree with that, correct?
Well, I think that period from the invocation of the Emergencies Act to when the Emergencies Act was then rescinded or removed was such a short period of time that it's, I think quite logical. I think there were only, don't hold me to the number, 5 or 6 transactions that did surface as a result of that, because we were talking about a period of 6 or 7 days.
Right, but I think FinTrack's report is more than that. Even in January, even to the lead up to the convoy and before the emergency period, they did not see an increase in suspicious transaction reporting under the PCMLFTA.
Yeah, the issue there, of course, as you know, is that because the perimeter of what FinTrack was actively reviewing was probably narrower than it should have been, because it didn't include crowdfunding and it didn't include payment processors, that clearly that was a gap, and that gap needed to be addressed, which we did temporarily, on a temporary basis in the Emergencies Act, and then on a longer term basis in legislation and regulations that followed.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Commissioner, for the indulgence.
Okay.